when you're able to profess and manifest that through your pen, like he wrote his death before his death happened.
Tupac died in 1996, but his secrets survived. Crumpled papers, torn notebooks, and scribbled pages sat untouched for years, looking like random thoughts that meant nothing to anyone. Then someone looked closer and found patterns, codes, and warnings hidden in plain sight. The notes revealed a side of Tupac the world never knew, a man who saw danger coming and documented everything in secret. What did he know that he could not say out loud? And who was he trying to warn? Join us as we decode the mystery Tupac left behind for the world to discover. The Hidden Pages. Years after Tupac Shakur died on that September night in 1996, most people thought they knew his story. They had the albums, the interviews, the movies, and the documentaries. But what they did not have were the pages he never meant anyone to see. These were not lyrics written for the studio, and they were not poems meant for publication. They were scraps of paper covered in his handwriting, tucked away in boxes that sat untouched for decades. Some were folded into tight squares, while others were crumpled, stained with coffee rings or torn at the edges. A few had been written on the back of old receipts or hotel stationery, and they looked like trash to anyone who did not know better. For years, these notes moved through private hands. Family members kept some, friends held on to others, and a few ended up in storage units that were forgotten until someone missed a payment and the contents got auctioned off to strangers. Nobody thought much about them because nobody understood what they were looking at. They seemed random, messy, the kind of thing a busy artist scribbles down and tosses aside without thinking. But Tupac was always thinking. He wrote constantly, on planes, in cars, between studio sessions, and late at night when he could not sleep. He filled notebooks and loose pages with words that spilled out faster than he could organize them. Some lines were clear, while others were half-finished thoughts that trailed off into nothing, and scattered throughout were symbols, random letters, numbers that seemed to serve no purpose, and words that repeated over and over for no obvious reason. To the casual observer, it looked like chaos, like the scattered brain of someone who could not sit still long enough to finish a complete thought. But that was the trick. Tupac wanted it to look that way, knowing people would glance at these pages and see nothing important. And for decades, that is exactly what happened. Until someone finally decided to look closer. A small team of researchers and fans who had spent years studying Tupac's life began gathering every scrap of his handwriting they could find. They scanned pages, compared notes, and laid everything out, searching for patterns. At first, it seemed hopeless because the notes were too scattered, too messy, too broken. But then, slowly, something started to emerge. Certain words appeared again and again, symbols matched across different pages written months apart, and spacing seemed deliberate. The chaos was not chaos at all, and now, decades later, someone has finally looked closer. And what they found is shocking. Lost and found. The notes had survived by pure luck. When Tupac died, his belongings were divided among family, friends, and business partners. Some items were carefully preserved, while others were packed into boxes and forgotten, and a few disappeared entirely, sold off, or lost in the confusion that followed his death. Nobody had a complete picture of what he left behind. One cousin had a notebook from 1994. A former girlfriend kept letters he wrote during a prison stay. And a studio engineer held onto papers Tupac had scribbled on during late-night recording sessions. Each person guarded their pieces like treasures, but none of them knew what the others had. For years, these fragments remained scattered across the country. Some were stored in attics in California, others sat in closets in New York, and a few ended up in the hands of collectors who bought them at auctions without knowing their true value. Then, in the early 2000s, a small group of dedicated fans and researchers began a mission. They wanted to gather everything Tupac had ever written, so they tracked down family members, contacted old friends, and scoured auction sites and private collections. Slowly, piece by piece, they started bringing the fragments together. It was not easy. Some people refused to share what they had. Others wanted too much money, and a few had lost their pieces entirely or claimed they never had anything to begin with. But the team kept searching, traveling across states, spending their own money, begging and negotiating and refusing to give up. And eventually, they had enough. By the time they laid everything out, they had hundreds of pages. Some were complete notebooks, others were single sheets covered in writing, and there were napkins with phrases scribbled in pen, envelopes with symbols drawn on the back, and hotel notepads filled with half-finished thoughts. It was overwhelming, chaotic, and at first, it seemed impossible to make sense of any of it. The team tried reading through the pages in order, but there was no order. They tried grouping them by date, but most were not dated. And they tried organizing by topic, but the topics shifted mid-page without warning. Nothing connected, nothing made sense. But even with the pages collected, no one could read them at first. The truth was hidden in plain sight. Something was there, and they could feel it. The way certain words kept appearing, the way symbols showed up across pages written years apart, the way Tupac had underlined some things and circled others. It was not random, it could not be random. They just had to figure out how to see it. The chaos that made sense. At first glance, the notes were chaotic, and anyone flipping through them would have thought Tupac was just writing whatever came to mind. Broken phrases covered the pages, crossed out lines ran through entire paragraphs, and repeated words appeared in clusters that seemed to serve no purpose. Random letters sat alone at the edges of pages, numbers were scribbled in corners, and some sentences started strong before trailing off into nothing. It looked like the scattered thoughts of a restless mind, the kind of mess someone creates when they are thinking too fast to organize anything properly. To most people, it would have been meaningless, the private ramblings of someone who never expected anyone else to read them. But the research team knew better than to trust first impressions. They had studied Tupac long enough to understand that he never did anything without purpose, even when it looked random. He was strategic in everything, from his music to his interviews to the way he presented himself to the world. Every move was calculated, every word chosen for a reason. So why would his private notes be any different? They started looking deeper, examining not just what he wrote, but how he wrote it. They noticed that certain phrases appeared across multiple pages written months or even years apart, always with the same spacing, the same underlines, the same circles drawn around them. They saw that some words were written in capital letters while others were lowercase, and the pattern was too consistent to be accidental. Then they found the repetitions, and that was when things started to shift. Tupac would write the same word over and over, sometimes 10 times, sometimes 20, but never randomly. The repetitions always appeared near specific names or dates or symbols, as if he was marking something important, highlighting it in a way that only he would recognize. And the crossed out lines were not mistakes at all. When the team compared them across different notebooks, they realized that what Tupac crossed out was just as important as what he'd left visible. The deletions created patterns, revealed connections, and pointed toward meanings that were hidden beneath the surface. Tupac was always thinking ahead, writing for a future that was not ready to understand him yet. He knew his words would be studied someday, so he built layers into everything, creating a system that would only make sense once someone took the time to decode it. And when the patterns finally appeared, they revealed something fans never expected: the secret code. The more investigators studied the notes, the more they realized Tupac had hidden messages, not in a traditional cipher that required keys or translations, but in spacing, repetition, symbols, and the way words returned across pages like echoes. It was a system of meaning only visible once you knew how to read it, and it required patience, attention, and a willingness to see beyond the obvious. They started with the symbols, small marks that appeared throughout the notebooks. Some looked like stars, others like crosses or circles with lines through them, and a few resembled letters from alphabets that did not exist. At first, the team thought they were doodles, the kind of mindless drawings people make while talking on the phone or waiting for something to happen. But then they noticed the symbols always appeared near specific types of content. A star would show up next to a name, a circle near a date, and a crossed line beside a location. The symbols were markers, tags that Tupac used to categorize information without writing it out directly. Once the team understood this, entire pages started to make sense, revealing networks of people, places, and events that Tupac had been tracking privately. The spacing was another key. Tupac would leave unusual gaps between words, sometimes 3 or 4 spaces where there should only be one, and at first it seemed like careless handwriting. But when the team measured the spaces, they found consistency. A 3-space gap always appeared before names of people he did not trust, while single spaces marked neutral content. and no spaces. Words jammed together indicated urgency or danger. Then, there were the repetitions, which turned out to be the most complex part of the code. When Tupac wrote the same word multiple times in a row, the number of repetitions mattered. 3 repetitions meant caution, 5 meant something was confirmed, and 7 or more meant the information was critical. The team tested this theory across hundreds of pages, and it held up every time, revealing a hidden layer of emphasis that transformed random-looking text into carefully organized warnings. And once it was decoded, the tone changed completely, because these were not just thoughts, they were warnings. Every page took on new weight, every symbol pointed towards something specific, and every repetition highlighted dangers that Tupac had seen coming long before anyone else noticed. The chaos had been a disguise, a way to hide the truth in plain sight, and now that the code was cracked, the real story could finally begin to emerge. Warnings from the past. The decoded notes revealed fears, suspicions, and awareness of danger that the public never saw. And once the team understood the system, the content became impossible to ignore. These were not vague feelings or paranoid thoughts written in moments of stress. They were specific observations about betrayals, pressures, and threats that Tupac had documented carefully over time. Lines that seemed random now made sense as premonitions, reflections on people he trusted, and secrets he had to protect until the right moment. A phrase like, "watch the ones closest," appeared repeatedly across different notebooks, sometimes with 3 space gaps before certain initials, sometimes with symbols marking specific dates. The team found pages where Tupac wrote about feeling watched, followed, and pressured from multiple directions at once. He described meetings that felt wrong, phone calls that came at strange hours, and conversations where people asked too many questions about his plans. These entries were not emotional rants. They were clinical observations written with the precision of someone gathering evidence. And the timing mattered. Many of these warnings appeared in the final 2 years of his life, clustering around specific events that later became significant. A notebook from early 1996 was filled with repeated references to changes coming, always marked with 5 repetitions to indicate confirmation. Another set of pages from that summer mentioned pressure from all sides, with symbols pointing to names, locations, and organizations that the team could now identify. Some entries were more direct, though still coded. Tupac wrote about people who smiled in public but worked against him privately, about business deals that seemed designed to trap him, and about situations where he felt forced to choose between bad options. He never named anyone outright in these sections, but the initials, the symbols, and the spacing made it clear who he was talking about. And some of the names hinted at truths that could shake everything fans thought they knew, because they were not the obvious suspects. These were people who had been close to Tupac, who appeared in photos with him, who gave interviews praising him after his death. But in his private notes, next to their initials, were warnings marked with 7 or more repetitions, the code for critical information, for danger that could not be ignored. The decoded pages painted a picture of someone who saw threats everywhere, not because he was paranoid, but because the threats were real. Tupac had been documenting his situation quietly, creating a record that would only make sense to someone willing to look closely enough to find it. Hidden references. Within the notes, initials, symbols, and repeated words pointed to people, places, and events, hidden intentionally so only someone paying attention would ever notice. Tupac had created a personal map, scattered like breadcrumbs across his notebooks, and each reference was a clue waiting to be connected to something larger. The initials were the most obvious once you knew to look for them. They appeared in margins, tucked between unrelated sentences, or sitting alone at the bottom of pages. Sometimes they were circled, other times underlined, and occasionally they appeared multiple times on the same page with different symbols next to each instance. The team began cataloging every set of initials they found, cross-referencing them with people in Tupac's life, business partners, friends, rivals, industry executives, and label representatives. What they discovered was unsettling. Some initials appeared with stars, which the team had learned indicated trust or importance, but those same initials would later appear with crossed circles, the symbol for warning or betrayal. It was as if Tupac was tracking how his relationships changed over time, documenting the exact moments when someone he trusted became someone he needed to watch. The places were coded differently, often as single letters combined with numbers that represented dates or addresses. A page from late 1995 had LV written 7 times, each instance surrounded by symbols that indicated danger. And the team realized he was referencing Las Vegas months before the night that would change everything. Other locations appeared with similar patterns. Cities where significant events happened, studios where important decisions were made, and hotels where private meetings took place. Then there were the events, moments that seemed minor at the time, but took on new meaning when viewed through the lens of Tupac's notes. He documented label meetings with unusual detail, marking who attended, who spoke, and who stayed silent. He tracked conversations about contracts, album releases, and business moves, always noting when something felt wrong or when pressure was applied. The repeated words turned out to be the most revealing references of all. Or words like contract, loyalty, and exit appeared throughout the notebooks, always with specific repetition counts that indicated their importance. When contract appeared 5 times, it meant a deal was confirmed, but when it appeared with crossed out lines and warning symbols, it meant the deal was dangerous. And only when the pattern was fully revealed did the message start to make sense, because these were not random observations, they were pieces of a timeline, a carefully documented record of everything Tupac saw happening around him in those final years. Silence that protected him. Tupac never spoke these truths publicly, not because he did not want to, but because the world was not ready, and saying too much could have been dangerous. He had built a reputation as someone who spoke his mind without fear, who called out injustice and challenged authority, but there were some things even he knew better than to say out loud. The public Tupac was bold, confrontational, willing to name names and start battles that others avoided. But the private Tupac understood timing, strategy, and the cost of revealing certain information before the right moment. His notes showed this calculation clearly, pages where he wrote out accusations in full before crossing them out completely. Moments where he named specific people and situations before deciding the truth needed to stay hidden a little longer. In some entries, he wrote about wanting to expose everything, about being tired of playing games and keeping secrets while others worked against him in the shadows. The frustration was visible in his handwriting, in the way words became larger and darker as he pressed harder on the page, in sentences that end with multiple exclamation marks or question marks that seemed to demand answers from the universe itself. But then, often on the very next page, he would write about patience, about waiting for the right time, about protecting himself and the people he cared about, by staying silent until he had enough proof to make his case undeniable. He understood that speaking too soon could backfire, that accusations without evidence would be dismissed, and that powerful people had ways of silencing those who threatened their interests. The notes revealed someone who was gathering information methodically, documenting everything, creating a record that would survive even if he did not. He wrote as if he knew these pages might be his only way to tell the truth someday, his insurance policy against a world that might try to erase or rewrite his story after he was gone. There were entries where he mentioned specific dates in the future, moments when he planned to reveal certain things or make particular moves. And the team noticed that some of those dates never came because he died before reaching them. It was haunting to read plans that would never be executed, strategies that would never be tested, truths that were meant to come out but remained locked in notebooks instead. And now that future has arrived, but are we ready for what he left behind? Because the silence that protected him then means nothing now, and every word he held back is waiting to be understood by a world that has had decades to catch up to what he already knew. Fans, see it first. When the first parts of the Decoded notes leaked online, reactions were intense, immediate, and impossible to control. Within hours, screenshots were spreading across social media. Forums exploded with theories, and fans who had spent years debating Tupac's legacy suddenly had new material to analyze, argue over, and try to make sense of. Disbelief came first because the notes seemed too detailed, too specific, too aware to be real. People questioned whether they were authentic, whether someone had fabricated them to stir up controversy or profit from conspiracy theories that never seemed to die. But as more pages surfaced and experts confirmed the handwriting matched Tupac's verified samples, the skepticism started to crumble, replaced by something heavier and harder to process. Fans who had accepted the official story of Tupac's death, who had made peace with the tragedy and moved on, suddenly found themselves questioning everything again. If the notes were real, if Tupac had seen threats coming and documented them so carefully, then what did that mean about the people around him, the industry he worked in, and the circumstances that led to his death? Obsession took over for many, and entire communities formed around decoding the remaining notes, comparing symbols, tracking initials, and building elaborate charts that connected people, dates, and events. Some fans spent hours analyzing single pages, zooming in on photos to catch every detail, debating the meaning of spacing and repetition counts, and arguing about which interpretations made the most sense. The atmosphere became tense and divided, because not everyone wanted to believe what the notes suggested. Some fans insisted they were being taken out of context, that Tupac was just venting in private and never meant for these thoughts to become public knowledge. Others argued that dismissing the notes was disrespectful, that Tupac had left them for a reason and ignoring them meant failing to honor his truth. The fans struggled to reconcile the private Tupac with the public legend, because the man in these notes was more cautious, more strategic, more aware of danger than the fearless rebel they had idolized. It challenged the mythology that had built up around him, revealing someone who was not just bold, but also careful, not just confrontational, but also calculating, not just speaking truth to power, but also protecting himself from it. And suddenly everything about his final years felt different. Every interview took on new meaning, every lyric seemed like a clue, and every line of the notes now takes on a new weight. The final years revealed. The notes aligned with his actions, interviews, and decisions in the last years of his life, revealing a version of events where he saw threats, betrayal, and pressure coming before anyone else did. When the research team started cross-referencing the notebooks with public records, concert dates, studio sessions, and media appearances, the patterns became impossible to ignore, and what emerged was a timeline that matched perfectly with the documented facts, while adding layers of meaning that no one had previously understood. Entries from 1995 showed Tupac documenting changes in his business relationships, noting when certain people stopped returning calls, when meetings got rescheduled without explanation, and when contracts started including clauses that felt designed to trap him rather than protect him. These observations matched perfectly with the timeline of his label disputes, the tensions that were building behind the scenes while he maintained a confident public image, and the team could now see that what looked like sudden conflicts were actually situations he had been tracking for months. The summer of 1996 was especially revealing, because the notes from those months were dense with symbols, initials, and repeated warnings that something major was approaching. Pages were filled with references to travel plans, security concerns, and people he needed to avoid, and the team realized he was tracking threats from multiple directions simultaneously, categorizing them by severity and documenting how they evolved over time. He wrote about feeling pressure to attend certain events, about being advised to go places he did not want to go, and about situations where he felt his options were being controlled by others who claimed to have his best interests in mind. What made it chilling was how specific he was about timing. A notebook entry from late August mentioned dangerous weeks ahead, marked with 7 repetitions to indicate critical importance, and the spacing around those words suggested something he had tried to prevent but now accepted as inevitable. Another page from early September had a list of cities with symbols next to each one, and Las Vegas was circled multiple times with crossed lines through it. The warning symbol he used throughout his notes to mark situations that posed serious danger. His interviews from that period took on new meaning when viewed alongside the notebooks, because things he said publicly now seemed like carefully coded messages to those who knew how to listen. Statements about loyalty, trust, and staying aware were not just general philosophy. They were references to specific situations he was documenting privately, warnings disguised as wisdom. The notes showed someone who was not caught off guard or acting recklessly, but rather someone who saw exactly what was happening around him and made conscious choices about how to respond, knowing that every decision carried weight and consequences. It was a glimpse of a mind preparing for the end while the world remained unaware, and the timing of each note makes the story even more chilling. The truth fans were never ready, for these notes do not give clear answers, but they reveal awareness, foresight, and warning that transform everything we thought we understood about Tupac's final chapter. They do not solve the mysteries that have haunted fans for decades. They do not provide definitive proof of who was responsible for what. And they do not offer the kind of closure that people have been seeking since that September night in 1996, when everything changed forever. What they do provide is something more complex and harder to process, a window into the mind of someone who understood he was in danger, who saw betrayal coming from multiple directions, and who chose to document everything rather than go public with accusations he could not yet prove completely. The notes explain why Tupac's public life was only a part of the story, because he was living two different realities simultaneously. The bold artist who seemed fearless in front of cameras, and the strategic thinker who was carefully tracking threats in private, building a case that would only make sense to people willing to look for it. They show why the man behind the words was always one step ahead, hiding truths until we were ready, or maybe until we were forced to see them. He built layers into everything he left behind, creating a system that would only reveal itself when someone took the time to look closely enough. The decoded notes have not answered every question, but they have reframed all of them in ways that make simple explanations impossible. Fans who once debated straightforward theories now have to grapple with evidence of something far more complicated. A web of relationships, pressures, and conflicts that Tupac was navigating while the world only saw the surface, the music, the controversy, and the headlines. The warnings he left behind point toward truths that some people still do not want to acknowledge. Connections that challenge comfortable narratives we have told ourselves for years, and realities that are messier and more disturbing than the legends we prefer to believe. And now that the code is cracked, the question remains, what else did he leave behind for the world to discover? Because these notebooks were not the only place Tupac hid information. The research team believes there are more layers waiting to be found, more patterns embedded in his music, his videos, his interviews, and his other writings that have been examined thousands of times but never with this lens. If he was this deliberate about coding his private notes, what did he hide in the work he knew millions of people would study for generations, analyzing every word and every beat for meaning? The search has only just begun, and every new discovery raises more questions than it answers, pulling fans deeper into a mystery that Tupac designed to unfold slowly, revealing itself only when we were finally ready to handle the truth. He could not speak while he was alive, the truth that would have put him in even greater danger than he already faced.